In the 1990s, Madeleine Stowe was exactly the kind of actress Hollywood was built to elevate. She had the face, the presence, the range, and most importantly, the rare ability to make a film feel grounded no matter how heightened the story became. And yet, if you ask most people today to name the biggest movie stars of that decade, her name often doesn't come up first. That's the strange contradiction at the center of her career. She wasn't obscure, she wasn't unsuccessful, she was, for a time, genuinely everywhere. And then, almost without drama, she wasn't. Madeleine Stowe's rise wasn't built on scandal or hype, it was built on work. Before she ever became an actress, she trained seriously as a classical pianist, a path that requires discipline, repetition, and emotional control. That background mattered. Plus, because when she eventually moved into acting, she brought the same quiet intensity with her. She wasn't the loudest performer in the room, but she didn't need to be. The camera came to her naturally, and audiences noticed. Her first major breakthrough arrived in 1987 with Stakeout, a comedy action film where she played Maria, the woman at the center of a surveillance operation that quickly becomes personal. The movie was a major commercial success, and it did something crucial for Stowe. It proved she could carry a studio film. She wasn't just a striking presence. She had comedic timing, charm, and a screen magnetism that made people want to watch her. Hollywood, always hungry for the next dependable leading woman, took immediate notice. From there, her career moved steadily upward. In 1989, she appeared in Worth Winning, playing a demanding intellectual and classical pianist opposite Mark Harmon, and that same year she starred in Revenge with Kevin Costner, a romantic thriller set in Mexico. These weren't just random roles, they were positioning her carefully within the industry as someone who could move between romance, drama, and tension-driven storytelling without losing credibility. Then came the early 1990s, when her filmography began to look like the resume of a true star. In 1990, she appeared in The Two Jakes opposite Jack Nicholson, stepping into a noir world tied to the legacy of Chinatown. In 1991, she took on Closetland, an intense psychological two-character drama opposite Alan Rickman, playing a children's author interrogated under suspicion of subversive messaging. These were not lightweight projects. They showed she was willing to take risks and embrace material that demanded more than surface-level glamour. That same period also placed her at the center of one of the defining thriller waves of the early 90s. Unlawful Entry became a standout paranoia-era film, with Stowe playing Karen Carr, a woman whose life spirals after a home invasion and the involvement of a police officer who becomes increasingly dangerous. The film was a commercial success, and it worked because of the uneasy chemistry between its leads. Stowe wasn't playing an abstract concept, she was playing fear, confusion, and survival in a way that felt uncomfortably real. But the role that truly defined her career arrived in 1992 with The Last of the Mohicans. Directed by Michael Mann and set during the French and Indian War, it wasn't just another period romance. It was an epic, emotionally charged film that became a massive success. Stowe played Cora Munro, the eldest daughter of a British colonel, and her performance carried both strength and vulnerability without ever collapsing into cliché. The chemistry between Stowe and Daniel Day-Lewis was electric, and their final scenes together became some of the most romantic and enduring moments in 1990s cinema. It was the kind of role that should have permanently cemented her as a household name. Instead of coasting on that success, she continued choosing projects that stretched her. In 1993, she appeared in Shortcuts, Robert Altman's ambitious ensemble drama exploring interconnected lives in Los Angeles. It was a film driven by character and atmosphere more than plot, and Stowe held her own among an extraordinary cast, proving again that she belonged in prestige cinema as much as mainstream thrillers. In 1994, she took on Blink, her first true leading role in a major thriller. She played Emma Brody, a blind musician who regains partial sight through a corneal transplant, only to witness a murder she cannot fully process in real time. The film's concept allowed Stowe to play skepticism, vulnerability, toughness, and delayed terror all at once. Critics praised the film as an unusually strong thriller, and Stowe's performance was central to what made it work. That same year, she starred in China Moon, a neo-noir mystery where she played a classic femme fatale opposite Ed Harris and Benicio del Toro, stepping into the sultry, obsession-driven tradition of films like Body Heat. By this point, her career was not just active, it was dominant. She had become one of the defining faces of adult-oriented Hollywood cinema in the 1990s, moving between thrillers, prestige dramas, romances, and noir without losing momentum. Then came 12 Monkeys in 1995, the Terry Gilliam sci-fi thriller that cemented her status as a major star. Playing Dr. Catherine Rayleigh, a psychiatrist pulled into the orbit of a time traveler played by Bruce Willis, Stowe delivered what many consider her finest performance. The role required her to be skeptical, compassionate, terrified, and ultimately heroic, all while holding her own against Willis and a scene-stealing Brad Pitt. By the mid-1990s, Madeleine Stowe wasn't just a working actress, she was a genuine movie star, and yet even at her peak, something was beginning to shift beneath the surface, because while the industry was rewarding her, she was starting to question what it was rewarding her for. The next phase of her story isn't about a scandal or a collapse. It's about a slow realization that the roles being offered and the way women were written in Hollywood at the time were becoming harder for her to accept. That's where the real mystery begins. By the mid-1990s, Madeleine Stowe had reached a level most actors spend their entire lives chasing. She had proven herself in studio hits, prestige ensemble dramas, thrillers, and one of the defining romantic epics of the decade. She wasn't a one-genre performer or a passing trend. She was established. And yet, the question that hangs over her career is simple. If she was truly that big, why doesn't her name sit alongside the most constantly celebrated stars of her era? That's the part of the answer lies in what Hollywood was actually offering her. Stowe was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the way female roles were written and framed, especially as she gained perspective. She spoke openly about how the industry reminded her how disposable women could be, and how unsatisfying it became to repeatedly play victims. What once felt like part of the job began to feel more limiting, even dehumanizing. She realized she couldn't continue doing the same kind of roles over and over. She wasn't interested in being reduced to a symbol of fear or beauty. She wanted complexity. She explained that what fascinated her was erratic behavior, the inconsistencies that make people real, and she pointed out something fundamental. Men in film were allowed to be contradictory, flawed, unpredictable, even chaotic. Women too often were written as one-dimensional, the girlfriend, the prize, the victim, the object, not the full human being. For an actress with her intelligence and range, that limitation wasn't just frustrating, it was suffocating. At the same time, Stowe had built something outside of Hollywood that mattered more to her than the endless chase for the next role. In 1982, she married actor Brian Benben after they met on the NBC miniseries The Gangster Chronicles in 1981. Their relationship endured for decades in an industry famous for instability, and together they created a life that had nothing to do with premieres or press tours. They owned and operated a working cattle ranch outside of Fredericksburg, Texas. This wasn't a celebrity hobby or a weekend escape, it was real labor, real responsibility, and a daily commitment. Then, in 1996, Stowe became a mother when she and Benben welcomed their daughter, May Theodora, in San Antonio. Motherhood shifted her priorities in a way Hollywood could not accommodate or understand, so she made a choice that very few major stars ever make. She stepped away, not with a dramatic announcement, not with bitterness, not with scandal. She simply stopped. After 12 Monkeys, at the height of her career, she pulled back from acting in 1996 to focus on her family and the life she valued more. In a town built on ambition and constant visibility, disappearing quietly might be the most radical move of all. When she returned in 1998, it was with Playing by Heart, an ensemble romantic drama packed with major names. She played a woman dealing with marital difficulty, only grounding the film with the same emotional seriousness she always brought to her work. Then came The General's Daughter in 1999, a military thriller opposite John Travolta, where she played Sarah Sunhill, a rape investigator and former flame of his character. The film was a box office success, grossing nearly $150 million worldwide. Even after stepping back, she could still headline major projects, but something had changed. Her appearances became increasingly rare. The momentum of her 90s run didn't continue into the new millennium, not because she couldn't get work, but because she didn't want the kind of work being offered. In 2002, she appeared in We Were Soldiers, a war film based on the first major battle of the Vietnam War, even replacing Faith Hill in the role of Julie Moore. By that point, though, her heart wasn't fully in the Hollywood machine anymore. The contrast is striking when you look at what she could have had. In 1994, she earned $1.5 million for Bad Girls. By industry standards, she was at the top of her earning potential. She could have continued continued commanding major salaries for years. Instead, she chose something else entirely, and that choice is the real key to why she became the biggest movie star many people don't talk about anymore. Madeleine Stowe didn't vanish because she failed. She vanished because she understood something most performers never grasp until it's too late. Fame and fortune are not worth sacrificing your sense of self. Hollywood wants its stars to stay hungry, to keep chasing, to remain grateful no matter how successful they become. It rewards constant visibility. It punishes stillness. But Stowe had figured out what mattered more. When you're being asked repeatedly to play roles that make you feel dispensable, when you're no longer allowed to be interesting or inconsistent or complex, what is the point of continuing? So she slipped away, quietly, almost unnoticed. She came, she saw what was available, and she recognized the limitations being offered to her at that time. Perhaps the industry is changing now. Perhaps there are more nuanced roles for women today. But in Stowe's era, she found herself hemmed in by her looks and by the narrow expectations placed on actresses. For the last 2 decades, she lived largely out of the spotlight, remaining married to the same man for over 40 years, building a life far removed from the constant noise of Hollywood. And then, in the 2000s, she made one more major return. Not to film, but to television. The series Revenge gave her a new kind of platform. She played Victoria Grayson, a powerful, controlled, dangerous presence, the kind of role that finally allowed her to be something other than a victim or an object. It was steady work, and it was on her terms, in a medium that allowed her to stay closer to home. Reports noted she earned around $75,000 per episode during that run, a reminder that even after years away, her value never disappeared. In the end, Madeleine Stowe's story isn't a tragedy. It's not a cautionary tale of a career that collapsed. It's the story of someone who reached the Hollywood party, looked around, and decided she didn't need to stay. In a town built on ego and ambition, that might be her most impressive performance of all. Madeleine Stowe's career is one of the clearest examples of how fame and legacy don't always follow the same path. Because if you look at what she achieved, the question isn't whether she mattered. The question is how someone so central to a decade of cinema could become, in the public memory, almost like a hidden chapter. And the answer is that her disappearance was never a mystery in the tabloid sense. It was a quiet divergence from the machine. Stowe was never the kind of performer who built her identity around constant exposure. Her most iconic work came in an era when adult-oriented thrillers, romantic epics, and prestige dramas could dominate the mainstream. She wasn't part of a superhero franchise. She wasn't the face of a long-running action series. Her biggest films were the kinds of movies that people watched intensely in the moment, that critics respected, that audiences remembered emotionally, but that didn't always translate into the kind of modern pop culture branding that keeps names circulating forever. That matters, because when we talk about the stars who remain household names across generations, it often comes down to repetition, franchises, sequels, constant reinvention. Stowe's career was different. It was concentrated, it was high quality, and then it stopped, not because she was forced out, but because she chose a life that didn't require the spotlight. What makes her story even more striking is that she left at a time when she could have kept going indefinitely. There was no collapse, no scandal, no sudden failure. She was still bankable. She was still respected. The general's daughter proved that. We Were Soldiers proved that. Even her later return proved that, but she had already seen the limits of what was being offered. She spoke about the frustration of playing victims, about the way women were treated as disposable, about the lack of inconsistency and contradiction allowed in female roles. Those weren't abstract complaints. They were the core of why she stepped back, because she wasn't interested in being preserved as an image. She wanted to be an artist, and she wanted to be a person, so she built a life that was almost unimaginable for someone at her level. A working ranch in Texas, a marriage that lasted decades, a focus on motherhood and stability rather than the endless churn of auditions, press, and reinvention. In an industry that encourages obsession with relevance, she embraced the idea of stepping away, and yet stepping away didn't erase what she had already done. The Last of the Mohicans remains one of the defining romantic epics of its era, and Stowe's performance as Cora Munro is at the heart of why it endures. The film's emotional power doesn't work without her strength. 12 Monkeys remains a sci-fi classic, and her role as Dr. Catherine Rayleigh is not just supportive but essential, grounding the story's chaos in human fear and compassion. Unlawful Entry remains one of the sharpest paranoia thrillers of the early 90s, and she gives it its emotional realism. Blink, China Moon, Shortcuts. These films form a body of work that quietly proves she was never just a star. She was a serious actress in the middle of mainstream Hollywood. Her later return in Revenge introduced her to a new audience. And it's telling that the role that brought her back was one of authority, power, and complexity. Victoria Grayson wasn't a victim. She wasn't a love interest. She was a force. The kind of character Stowe had always been capable of playing, but rarely got the chance to fully inhabit in the 90s studio system. That is why the title fits so well. Madeleine Stowe is the biggest movie star you don't know, not because she lacks success, but because her career doesn't follow the usual narrative. She didn't burn out, she didn't implode, she didn't beg for a comeback, she simply stepped off the conveyor belt, and that makes her almost unique. Most stars are remembered not just for what they did, but for how long they stayed in the public eye. Stowe's legacy is different. It's about impact rather than noise, about performances rather than persona. Oh, about choosing a life over a brand. Hollywood is full of cautionary tales, but her story isn't one of ruin. It's one of control. She reached the top, recognized what it demanded, and decided she wanted something else. That decision may have made her less visible, but it also made her story more fascinating, because it forces you to ask what success actually means. If you measure success by constant fame, then yes, Madeleine Stowe disappeared. But if you measure it by the work she left behind, the films that still resonate, the performances that remain powerful decades later, then she never disappeared at all. She simply became something rarer than a celebrity. She became a star who walked away on her own terms. And in a town built on ego, ambition, and endless hunger, that might be the most unforgettable role Madeleine Stowe ever played.